Greetings from the center of Canada and welcome to the Fringe Faithful Collective. My name is Mike Powell and this is article episode number 3, entitled The Physical World, the Metaphysical Realm, and Our Persistent Tendency to Assess Reality by what we perceive to be actual. Regardless of what generation a person finds themselves in, experiencers of history are constantly facing the end of the world as they once knew it, and encountering the creation of something radically unfamiliar. These ongoing shifts often result in a straddling of old and new, whereby people both actively and passively participate in resisting and embracing change. This can be seen to happen with the spread or ascendancy of certain languages, cultures, and customs, as well as the development or evolution of thinking and technology. Growing up in the 1980s, my childhood, adolescence, and early adulthood was lived within the gap of several major technological innovations, which seemed to occur in relatively quick succession. And though life as we know it today is now functionally normative, presenting us with some arguably positive possibilities that were never realizable before, it has also frequently left us feeling as vaporous and virtual as the clouds, where we are now encouraged to store our digital stuff. So much is different from when I was a kid only 3 decades ago. People used to write letters and send them by mail, as opposed to using the latest form of social networking. Today, even email is quickly becoming an outdated method of interaction. Our first phone was rotary, which meant that making a call involved tangibly dialing numbers, whereas today everyone's got voice-activated mobiles that can connect friends and family using this or that immediate face-to-face telecommunication service. Before downloading and streaming videos, we had VHS tapes and VCRs that people used to borrow from the local rental store. And as for when I started listening to music, the first albums I ever heard were on vinyl, which was soon followed by cassette tapes, compact discs, and eventually files, like MP3s. In essence, everything over the past number of years has been becoming increasingly less physical and more electronic, less actual and more immaterial. One might even contend that the smaller, progressively more compact and invisible technologies that are arising have an ethereal quality about them. However, as much as I benefit from the ability to carry around literally thousands of songs in my pocket, I'd much rather buy an actual record and listen to the whole thing, start to finish, in my lounge on a turntable. Besides the simple nostalgia of transporting me back to a time long ago, the weight of an album, the art and lyrics it contains, the spinning of the disc, the active participation of flipping between sides A and B, the soft crackle of the needle, the analog tone of the music, etc., holistically engages with my senses. Perhaps that's a helpful way to describe a persistent spiritual setback of mine, which I presume is likely a common sentiment among nearly everyone, though often unvoiced. Specifically, like digital music, God lacks the actuality of a vinyl LP, which correspondingly and reasonably leads to questioning the reality of God's presence and activity in the world, which is why I'm more of a deist than a theist. But could it be that there is a problem conflating what's actual with what's real? In other words, is it possible for something that's not actual to be real? Is it conceivable for the insubstantial to have weight and influence? It reminds me of 3 quotes about reality. The first is from the Wachowskis' 1999 film The Matrix, where Morpheus says to Neo,
"What is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain."
Accordingly, we regularly define reality by what we observe with our senses. But does this mean that what's unquantifiable or unreliably measurable lacks reality? And is it the case that we are no more than biological systems with self-consciousness? Or could it be that we're more than the mere sum of our parts? Related to this, Tom York sings in Radiohead's 2003 release There There,
Just 'cause you feel it doesn't mean it's there.
Just because you feel it doesn't mean it's there, which succinctly and soberly points out that our emotions and perceptions aren't always reliable or accurate. People have all manner of experiences and beliefs that aren't verifiable and that may in fact not be real. Still, it begs the question, could the opposite be true as well? Just because we don't feel it doesn't mean it's not there. This leads me to some comments made by one of my mentors, Dr. Victor Shepard, who pointed out an inherent problem with failing to differentiate between something actual versus something that's real. About this, he said,
in our secular understanding, we look upon the world of the creaturely order, trees, rocks, highways, pavement, music stands, tape recorders, we look upon that as real. Next question is, how then do we speak of God? Well, you've got to fit him in somewhere, but it's hard to fit him in, because plainly, if reality is what's empirically perceived, God is less real. God is less real. For a prophet and apostle, God has a reality, a concreteness, more concrete than the asphalt on which your car is parked. God is more real, more dense, more opaque, more substantive than lead or steel or iron. Is God real? And this lectern in the parking lot of my automobile merely actual? Or have we inverted it? The empirical world is real, and God is very iffy. Very iffy. Let me tell you something. There's nothing iffy about God. Nothing iffy at all. God is dense. God is real. God is weighty. But so there's a lot about us that's iffy. How real is God with respect to what you call the reality, I would call the actuality, of concrete physical objects? Because for a prophet and apostle, God is so overwhelmingly vivid that he could no more be doubted than they can deny themselves. We've lost that in the church.
I think it's a helpful distinction to make. The problem for me, however, is that I'm such a materialist that anything spiritual seems uncertain, ambiguous, and profoundly less real than I'd like it to be. So as much as I want to believe what Shepard said to be true, my own limited personal experiences of God within and outside of church significantly lack solidity and incontestability, which effectively reinforces the existential side of me. Yet despite the marked disintegration of faith that I've walked through over the last 10 years, I'm nevertheless persuaded that there's something to be said about there being a reality beyond what we can see, hear, smell, taste, touch, or recognize with some kind of sixth sense. I wish it was as straightforward as God becoming actual in the person of Jesus of Nazareth, which I do trust to be the case. But again, is it actuality that makes something real, or might it be a separate category altogether? After all, from a Christian perspective, as much as the Incarnation is indeed a decisive moment in human history, how are only 3 decades or so of divinity being actualized before dematerializing once more, able to convince anyone who came before or who would come afterward of God's reality? How does a divine person, temporarily or provisionally stepping into the physical realm, help me or you in our day and age when Christ is no longer empirically perceptible? And I get the whole follow-up perspective or reasoning of God now being spiritually present with us, which, in point of fact, does mirror the BCE experience of those in Israel quite well, as the Lord, even back then, was never seen and had no visible image other than the humans that were created in God's likeness. Even so, it's not very satisfying of an answer that we shouldn't expect to interact with God the way we relate to one another as humans. But perhaps that's what it ultimately comes down to. That is to say, our expectations. If the presumption is that we're able to discover what's real through the natural means that we study what's actual, We shouldn't be surprised if and when we don't find what we're looking for. However, what if there is a reality beyond what we can ascertain with our senses? And what if it's more real than we perceive it to be? What if God is more concrete or weighty than the device you're using to read or listen to these words? And though my preference is to listen to music on a record player, music is music, and it would be careless to give up listening to music if dropping the needle of a phonograph wasn't an option. The combination of vinyl, a turntable, and speakers is solely a medium through which we can hear a musician's work and words. Though invisible and intangible, it's the song that's real. Maybe it's somewhat similar with God. Peace and love, sisters and brothers.